Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast, an early morning, and again, another tongue twister. For those of you who've listened to podcasts in the morning before, I've had trouble early in the morning for some reason, occasionally, to get the words out. But thanks a lot for joining me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don. I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies with strategy, people, process, and technology, and we're offering a current ongoing series called the Scaling Method: Thoughts at Scale. And the series today is actually going to cover change management. So today at 12 Eastern time, I'll go live again, and we'll have a session on just change management and focusing in on that. The link for that session is at the very bottom of this page. And so if you could see it, it is thescalingmethod.com/thoughts at scale. And so with that, let me bring in our guest for today. It's Mara Holinger. Mara is the Senior VP and co-founder of Quantum Radiology Regulatory Solutions. She has an extensive experience in assisting pharmaceutical and biotech firms in preparing the regulatory pathway. So with that, welcome, Mara.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, it's interesting whenever I get started. It's early in the morning, obviously here in
It is.
Colorado, but at the same time, we were talking, had no problem. I get started, here, and all of a sudden I have a bit of a tongue twister. But yeah, more
I'm
fo-
sure I'll have my fair share, so you just set it up for me as well.
more focus on you now, and yeah. So, could you tell us just a little bit about yourself and kind of your background and what led you to this point in your career?
Sure. I mean, it was sort of a little bit of a circuitous route that got me to regulatory affairs. I started my career as a bench scientist. I have my PhD in molecular microbiology, and I was at the bench for many years, 12, I think total. Did my postdoc, and then I worked for a small startup company here in Boulder, Colorado. And it was around the time that I was starting my family that I decided I wanted to get out of the small startup space and the potential instability there. And I moved into what I thought was going to be medical writing. So I sort of got into regulatory affairs accidentally. I applied to a position at a boutique regulatory consulting firm here in Boulder called CBR International. They were recently purchased by Novotech, so they're no longer CBR. But um, I started there thinking I was getting into medical writing. I just thought a little bit more stable. I know how to write. I can write technically. I can write scientifically. But it turned out it was more of a regulatory consulting position, and I knew nothing about regulatory affairs when I started. I did not know what an IND was. I had no idea how the drug development process went. And I learned very quickly. It was a fantastic learning environment. I was able to really just dig in and get used to the whole idea of regulatory strategy. I feel like I got pretty good at it. By the time I left CBR, I was vice president of regulatory affairs, and I was taking on a new challenge. Veristat's an East Coast company, a larger CRO. They do clinops and stats and medical writing as well. And they had asked me to come on board to build the regulatory function. So I joined them. There was no regulatory affairs team. It was my job to build that. I was there for 4 years, and I helped build the team, but we also had an acquisition. We acquired a small company out of Michigan called Catalyst, which is where I met one of my co-founders of Quantum. His name is Mark Amon. Um, so I was there for 4 years, helped with Mark build the team from one full-time employee to 31 by the time that I left. And when I left, it was only last year. I left in actually January of this year to start a position with a pharmaceutical company, also out of Boston, Sumitomo Pharma Oncology. I had never been on the pharma side except for when I was at the bench, and then it was a very small company. And I decided I wanted to give that a try. And I was there, I was dedicated. I really enjoyed the team there. But when the opportunity to work with Mark again presented itself, and he introduced me to Don Chitty, our third co founder, kind of running my own consulting group has been a dream of mine since starting in regulatory. So it was an opportunity that was hard to pass up. And holy moly, has it been different trying to start a business from, running teams. I've definitely been a manager. I've helped build teams, but to start a business from scratch is different.
I agree with you. It's I mean, I feel like in a startup you wear a lot of hats anyway. I mean, it's just one of those
Yeah.
things where you sort of have to naturally wear a lot of hats because of just the nature. But now as a founder, you're probably in a wholly different realm, even having to continually think both strategically and tactically on top of wearing those multiple hats.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I just helped get one of our new employees set up by figuring out how to do tax withholding and unemployment in New Jersey.
Yeah,
Not
well,
something I thought I would ever do.
yeah, it's yeah, it's funny because I always am thankful for accountants and CPAs because for me that's the way that we do it on our end is I just sort of farm out that aspect of it, but yeah.
I'm
Uh,
hoping we'll get there.
so in terms of you know it sounds to me like your career journey more or less led you to the point of regulatory. But I mean, also there has to be a little bit of passion that you found, behind this as well. I would imagine that you've sort of, in working in this space, you sort of found this as a place to be as well.
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't still be here. As I said, it was somewhat accidental that I got into the field of regulatory affairs, but I very quickly learned to really love it and get very passionate about it. And I think what helps me with that is this scientific background and the fact that a lot of sponsors will come to us with these really novel, cool scientific ideas and they are more than happy to have me dive in scientifically and not just from the regulatory aspect. So I learn about the products, how they work, mechanism of action. It's more than just, hey, here's what you need to do to get your product into humans, or here's what you need to do to get approved. It's actually paying attention to the science, figuring out what the targets are, what they need to do in terms of the right testing. And I found that it's a little bit like trying to put together a puzzle sometimes, especially if you're working with a very novel product where there's no precedent, and it can be really exciting.
Yeah, I, it's one of those things. So somebody asked me recently, sort of what made you want to work in this, in this field. Similar sort of question came to me, and for me, it's watching that connection happen, and then
Mhm.
sort of being an outsider and listening to how how the mechanisms of action happen, how the sort of science that built to this point happened, that makes for an interesting story. But I would imagine that somebody that's on the regulatory side has to even dig much deeper to try and understand to lead you to that point, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is that in terms of in overseeing 50 INDs, what has led you to that point of really understanding, but also what other key challenges have you faced, in having to do that as well?
Yeah, I think I happen to just be in one of those fields where there are degrees. You can get a degree in regulatory affairs, and they're certainly valuable. But the only thing that really gets you to the point where you understand what's happening is experience. You have to dive in, which is why that first experience I talked about at CBR International was so critical to my career, because they let you just dive right in, and it's intense and it's a very fast learning curve. But I think when it comes to these regulatory applications like INDs, NDAs, BLAs, one of the major challenges I've seen, especially working with small to mid-sized pharma, is a lack of understanding of what goes into these applications, how big they are. An IND can be hundreds of documents, an NDA 10 times that. So managing all of the materials that need to go into these applications is truly a team effort, and you really need somebody on your team that has done it before, that understands exactly what needs to go in to make sure that you're in compliance and your application is complete. It's one thing if you haven't done things correctly and FDA comes back and says you need to do some more non-clinical testing, but it's another if FDA comes back and says you missed these four pieces of your application, then I'm not doing my job at all. So it's really important for sponsors that don't have a good feel for what goes into these applications to work with folks like Quantum Regulatory Solutions, but also others. They need non-clinical experts. They need clinical operations experts. It's not something, especially a small company, a virtual team can do by themselves. So it's making sure that our sponsors understand the complexity of these
Mm,
applications and that they get them in a complete fashion so that FDA has the right materials to review.
yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us more about Quantum Regulatory Solutions? What sets the company apart?
Yeah, so Quantum Regulatory Solutions is a boutique regulatory consulting firm. We've got three co-founders, all with very strong scientific backgrounds. I told you about my PhD. Don Chitty is an organic chemist by training, and Mark Aman has a doctor of pharmacy degree. And so we all have very strong scientific backgrounds. Our entire team actually is very strong scientifically. I think that that's something that sets us apart from some other regulatory consulting groups. We can really get in and understand what it is your product's doing. We understand the pathways of the disease, the therapeutic area that you're working in. But I think what truly sets us apart is largely our competitors are going to be CROs. That regulatory affairs is part of a service offering where there's many other service offerings included, or independent consultants. And in the case of a larger CRO, um, like I said, the regulatory piece is just a piece of the package. They're offering you several other service offerings as well. It's a much larger team that has to work together and be cohesive. And honestly, I feel like regulatory can sometimes get forgotten in that scenario, and it just doesn't have quite the right emphasis from my perspective. Um, and then in terms of independent consultants, there are a lot of fabulous independent consultants out there. And in fact, we have 40 or so that we work with regularly that are experts in niche areas, but they're only one person. They can only do so much and they can't flesh out that service offering. Whereas a group like ours, we are a holistic regulatory group. We can do everything from the regulatory strategy to the publishing and submissions through the gateway, CMC. We've got non-clinical experts that can help you make sure you've done everything that's needed from a non-clinical perspective. We can help get you introduced to your clinical experts that you need. But there's the service is very personalized. We're not just a pass-through service provider. We like to partner with our clients and truly integrate into their teams. And I think that our sponsors, our clients that we work with really feel that and they come back again and again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those. I do feel like our space in general is very small.
It
Whenever
is.
you think about the body of people, I feel like you continually trip over the same people repeatedly in the space, and so um, at that same time, I also think that they're given the complexities that we face. It's one of those things where we need somebody that can be our guide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And be a champion. Um, and like you said, whenever you sort of, incorporate a lot of different services all in one, sometimes you wonder, is that service, really emphasized or not? And so I could see that being a benefit as well with Quantum.
Thanks. Yeah.
All right. And so in terms of clients, so let's talk about like primarily what sort of clients you serve, and then also what sort of services Quantum primarily offers.
So we tend to serve mostly small to mid-size pharmaceutical companies. We do have clients that are in the larger pharma arena. With them, we tend to do a little bit more of kind of an FSP model where they need people, but they're not hiring at the moment, and so they contract with us to have a full-time employee for a year. And so we've got a couple of those situations, but for the most part, a lot of our clients are, as I said, small to mid-size. They're early usually in development. They've got this great product. They see in non-clinical settings that it works really well, but they don't know how to get from there to humans. And so we come in and help them with a regulatory roadmap, non-clinical roadmap, clinical, and help them determine how to get into humans in the first place. But then we're also very forward thinking. We don't just, do the piece that they hire us for and here you go, bye. We're really thinking about the entire pathway. So, we'll contract with a group that wants us to help run their pre-IND meeting, for example, and get any questions answered before they actually submit their IND to get into the clinic. But we're thinking, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road. We're not just thinking about how to get them to IND. And so these are the things that we've done time and time again, and we can help bring them that expertise. I think in terms of unique services, there are many other groups like ours that do similar things. The CROs that I mentioned do similar things. The independent consultants. I don't know that we necessarily have unique services per se, but we do, I think, provide a comprehensive solution, but with a small company feel, that kind of personalized approach that I think a lot of our sponsors appreciate.
I would think that one of the things that also, I mean, whenever you were describing kind of the different skill sets of all of your co-founders, it sounds to me that that trifecta of skill is probably something more unique to try and find, especially in an independent consultant. In a
Mhm.
larger CRO, obviously they're going to have a lot of different skill sets as well to leverage. But I would think that that sort of mix of skill is probably not something that a lot of independent consultants have, unless I'm wrong.
No, I think that you're absolutely correct. And I think it's one of the things that helps to set us apart. So, all of our employees, the three co founders, we can all work very independently with our sponsors. We don't necessarily need support from other people. We can handle 90% of what is thrown at us. And it ends up so that we can end up sort of siloed where we're working with our sponsors and we're not really working with each other.
Mhm.
And I think that that's what I bring to the table, is kind of help prevent those silos and really develop the relationships between us at Quantum. And I mean, I feel like you're throwing softballs at me here, but you set it up perfectly that the skill sets are very complementary. And part of what I do is I make sure that everyone on the team understands the skills and expertise of everybody else. We just had a big face-to-face meeting here in Boulder. Actually, we stayed at the Boulderado Hotel. It was quite lovely. Um, and just making sure that folks know who they can ask if a question comes in from a sponsor and it's not my area of expertise, but I know that Mark has done that before, then I can call him up and we have a conversation about it. And all of our staff meetings, our biweekly staff meetings, we do a whole lot of information sharing, but question asking. We spent, a good 15 minutes on our staff meeting this week answering a question for one of my programs. And it's just fabulous because we've got all these experts with so many years of expertise, but in different areas, and we're able to really collaborate and offer that as a comprehensive situation. And in
Yeah.
terms of like the leadership, the co-founders, you mentioned, the three of us and our different skill sets. Mine tends to be relationship, team building. But I feel like there's, as you mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of different hats. We're currently HR, we're payroll, we're business development. And I feel like kind of those day-to-day administrative things, Mark and Dawn are a bit better at, or maybe more passionate about. And I tend to focus a little bit more on that relationship between all of our staff and just making sure that it's a wonderful place to work, and we also have built a relationship that will really serve our clients.
Yeah, so important. In terms of the company progression, can you share any success stories or significant milestones that Quantum has achieved?
So this is a bit of a tough one. We've only been open since April, so I can't give you some major, we got this individualized treatment to this patient and it was so exciting, or we've had our first NDA approval, because those things haven't quite happened yet. I think our success really lies in the fact that we've only been open since April, but we already have 10 employees. We've got more than 35 signed clients, and while a lot of those clients are early in development, as I mentioned, we have had a couple that have come to us and we are advising them on their marketing applications. And I think it's two different NDAs that we're working on, both trying to go in by the end of the year, where they needed that high level expertise to just make sure that they've got all their boxes checked, even though they're already working with other groups. They have opted to contract with us to just have that high level expert guidance to get those NDAs in. So I feel like our success really lies in the group that we've built and the company that we've built in such a short amount of time.
Very good. So in the last few questions, I wanted to focus in on you a little bit. What's the greatest leadership advice that you've received?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I can't think of like a singular quote to give you, something super inspirational, but I think for me, a lot of it has been I've had a lot of very strong female mentors or supervisors in my career, and I think early in my career and sometimes even now, I tend to apologize a little too much. There's a little imposter syndrome. I don't speak up in a room where there's several people I consider to be smarter than me. But I've had several really strong female role models that have helped me to overcome that my voice is important, and that if I don't say what it is that's on my mind, that something big can get missed. I have important contributions to make, and it really did. It took some strong female role models to get me to do that. And honestly, not just the female ones. Mark, my partner now, was my supervisor at Veristat for 2 years, and he always encouraged me to speak up as well, that and to not apologize if I feel like my opinion was contradictory. And it's still a learning curve, but I'm getting there. I feel like I'm really getting there.
It's interesting because oftentimes one of the things that I do as a consultant is to facilitate large meetings, and sometimes you find that there are people that just sit silent. One, because it's a group, it's a little uncomfortable, but at the same time, that it's those people that I most likely will call on at some point in the meeting as well, because like you said, they normally have some important contribution that you just haven't shared, and sometimes it is a bit contradictory, and you
Mhm.
have to work through it and sort of ask the group, I mean, is this something that we need to focus on and work on?
Yeah, and if
Yeah.
if that person doesn't give their opinion, then the group doesn't end up talking about it. So it's yeah, I agree with you 100%. I'm not particularly shy, but there are some settings where I get intimidated and I don't speak up. And I think that I would offer the same advice to others in the same position who feel uncomfortable because there's a lot of opinions already being thrown around. Yours is important too.
Yeah, absolutely. In your view, do you see the regulatory landscape evolving, and how do you how would you sort of advise new companies in terms of navigating this terrain?
So I think one of the things I love about being in the regulatory field is that it's constantly evolving. We have to learn all day, every day. It just changes so quickly between, laws passed by Congress, new regulations, new guidance from FDA, an ODAC meeting that would might happen to just set the world of oncology development on fire, and then you have to adjust and keep up with how FDA's views on things are changing. And so I think it's constantly evolving. It's been evolving since it started to exist. That it's just never settled. It's like the field of science in general. You have a hypothesis, you think you've proven it, and then 20 years later somebody shows something completely different. You have to keep learning with the field itself. So I think the best advice I could offer to companies, especially smaller companies that might not have a full team, is to engage with external experts early, to just
Mm,
make sure that people have their eyes on you. You might think that you're too early to engage, for example, a key opinion leader in the field of medical oncology, but if you're planning to treat folks with an oncologic condition, it's important to engage with those consultants early on, as well as, and this is a shameless plug, regulatory consultants to make sure that you are on the right path to satisfy FDA, regulations and concerns.
absolutely. So the last three questions: what inspires you?
It's those relationships. It's my colleagues. It's my family. It's my relationship with the sponsors. It's my relationships with health authorities. I feel like I am constantly inspired by other people and their pathways and their questions. And I worked very closely with a sponsor at one point where the owner of the company his mom had the disease that they were trying to treat. And
Mm.
there's some sense of pride that goes into that, feeling like you're truly helping an individual. It's not just your job, but you're actually helping someone out. So those relationships are what inspire me every day.
Very nice. What concerns you?
Well, if we're sticking to, my field and regulatory affairs, I think one of my major concerns is around, a really new and novel therapy that shows promise, in animals or in vitro, but it doesn't see the light of day, or it doesn't get to patients because mistakes are made along the way, because of lack of knowledge, lack of support, lack of funding.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things where I get really passionate about helping sponsors out, is making sure that they're on the right pathway, that they don't make mistakes that will kill their program, and that they get the funding. We also help sponsors with due diligence activities. If they're trying to get funding or if they're considering purchasing an asset, we can help analyze those things as well and help them procure that funding. So I think, just making sure that sponsors with these technologies that could truly help patients are actually able to get them to patients.
Yeah, it's a big challenge right now. I know several companies that have promising data, but unfortunately they're not getting funding. And
Mm-hmm.
even with promising data, the valley of death is ahead. And there's a very real fact that some of these companies just might not make it through this winter that we're feeling. And it's not just the actual season winter, but the
Yeah,
funding winter that we're going through as well.
it's a tough time right now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Last question. What excites you?
Um, What excites me? I think, I mentioned this earlier, puzzles. I really, honestly, in my personal life, I do a lot of puzzles. There's almost always one set up downstairs in my living room, and I'll work on it at night while my husband's watching hockey games. But also in the field of regulatory, my favorite programs to work on are those where there is no precedent. The pathway hasn't already been forged. FDA has not written guidance on this particular therapeutic area. It's a bit of a blind spot. And in order to develop a product correctly in that arena, we really have to partner with so many different stakeholders, including FDA, including those key opinion leaders in the clinic, including patients and patient advocacy groups. Like, we have to work with our sponsors and all of those other stakeholders to just make sure that we're on the right pathway. We've worked on programs where, there's no particular endpoint that's already been settled on for clinical testing to determine if the product actually works in the clinic. And so we have to work with all of those different groups to just ensure that, our sponsors are on the right path. And it can be really exciting. And I feel very passionate about those types of programs.
Yeah, and just being an inquisitive person and wanting to work through the challenges is something that I think makes a lot of people in our space unique in a
Yes.
way that we um, we're wanting to work through both the scientific part as well as the physical aspects of whatever the challenge might be.
Yeah, you don't get your PhD if you don't love learning, because it's a whole lot of years of really hard work. If you don't love learning, then that sounds very uncomfortable to me.
Very good. Well, Mara, thank you so much for joining the Life Science Success Podcast. Thanks for being here with me and telling us more about quantum regulatory. I greatly appreciate your time and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being on.
Thanks a lot.